It's it's fantastic to see so many people online, and it really feels like you couldn't pick a much more sort of topical time to sort of be having something like burnout, which is just seems to be so prevalent everywhere right now. We're really excited to be able to introduce you all to the very stellar Dr. Jacinta Jime. And we've had the privilege, Claire and I, of knowing Jacinta for some years now, and she really is a rock star. And let me just introduce you a little bit more fully to, this expert that we're going to be having. Hi, Jacinta, welcome. I imagine you're speaking to us from near San Francisco or in San Francisco. Is that right today?
Yep, all the way from San Francisco, California. I'm so happy to be here with all of you.
Yeah, and we are so grateful for you to make this time on your sort of early evening on the week. I'm just blurring, Tuesday evening, San Francisco time. Let me introduce Jacinta to all of the people online. So Jacinta is also known as Dr. J, is an award-winning author. She's a psychologist, Stanford trained, and board certified leadership coach with 15 plus years dedicated to the betterment of individuals and leaders and organizations. She's an in-demand speaker and consultant, and has worked with individuals in some of the top companies in Silicon Valley and internationally. Jacinta's a graduate of Stanford, has studied with some of the world's leading people there, but she also regularly contributes to, a whole array of national and international media, including CNN and Forbes and the like. Her best-selling book, need to be slower with that, The Burnout Fix, debuted as #1 release on Amazon. It's been recognized by Business Insider as a top book to read about burnout. Really excitingly right now, she's nominated as one of the 5 finalists, and only female, out of more than 10,000 nonfiction books in the prestigious Get Abstracts 2021 International Book of the Year. Now, they also have a Reader's Choice voting option, which I've already done. And if you like what you hear today, I encourage you to let's have a woman win the International Nonfiction Book of the Year. How Absolutely. Exciting would that be? We got to know Jacinta because she was Vice President of Coach Innovation at BetterUp, a company that we are angel sort of or early stage investors in. They're doing amazing things. They're now a unicorn. And Jacinta kind of led a global community of international leadership coaches in over 58 countries. So there's so much to Jacinta, but I think we should sort of keep moving. And before we do,
we absolutely should. And yeah, before we do, we just wanted to thank every one of you who's joined us, but also those of you that have given us your questions. We've had over 80 questions, and they're all stellar questions. So we've had to sort of really work out what are the themes going on here, and hopefully we'll cover off pretty much everyone's questions. But we will talk for about 40 minutes, and then we will have sort of 10 minutes or so where if you've got any burning questions that we haven't covered, that you can put them into chat, and we'll be trying to cover them off then. So yeah, so should we jump in?
Dive in. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's dive in.
Yeah. So, Jacinta, I think the obvious place to start is, what is burnout exactly?
Yes, I think that's a perfect place to start, because media gets burnout wrong. And with the advent of COVID and so many people feeling burnt out, it kind of can get misconstrued. And I am a science geek and I like science. And I want to give people the real definition of what burnout is. So basically, burnout happens, and we can talk about that a little bit more, but happens when we try to avoid being human for too long. When the nature of our work starts to pull so far, or the nature of our lives away from our human capacities. Think of it like a scale. The scales get so tipped. That's when burnout happens. But burnout shows up in 3 core components. So a lot of people think it's like exhaustion. I worked myself to the point of exhaustion, and now I need to rest. And yes, exhaustion is one of the components of burnout, but there's 2 other components that are really important to look for that may not be as obvious. So I'll start with exhaustion because that's the obvious one. That's immense emotional or physical and cognitive fatigue. This is for a long period of time. Anywhere at work, we're going to have maybe weeks or even a month where we feel really tired. This is for a prolonged period of time where you go on vacation, you don't feel better. You take time off of work, you don't feel better. People who feel exhaustion say, I can't face another day on the job. I'm so emotionally drained. But the two others that aren't as obvious is cynicism. And this is something really important to look out for if you're someone who is highly engaged, like myself. So I've burned out. I've talked to Claire and Greta about this. We've talked about our burnout experiences, and I'm someone who loves what I do so much. But that comes at a cost of me not knowing my boundaries or my limits sometimes and over engaging. But the people who are the most engaged can sometimes boomerang into cynicism, where they start going, I don't even know if my job means anything. I don't know if what I'm doing is contributing to my organization's mission. I don't like this anymore. And it's not true to who we are. We love what we do, but we're in the throes of burnout. And then the last one is inefficacy. So that's a lack of feelings of productivity on the job. Again, these people, you're very capable, but you're in the throes of burnout and you feel like I can't make progress on my job. I'm not contributing in the way I used to. And these can be really heartbreaking because they're not typical. They're not true to who the person is, but they're in the throes of burnout. But if we're not looking for cynicism, we may just think, oh, I'm not into my job anymore. Or if we're not looking for inefficacy, we may just think we're incapable at our jobs when it could be really showing up as burnout. And the last thing I'll say before I stop talking is burnout. People have different burnout profiles. So someone can have a lot of exhaustion, a moderate amount of cynicism, and a tiny bit of inefficacy. Whereas for me, I know that's a silver lining. If you have been burned out, you kind of know what to look for. Mine's high cynicism, and then a little bit of inefficacy, and then a moderate amount of exhaustion. So it's important to keep a lookout for all three of those components.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And, cynicism isn't necessarily that intuitive. And Jacinta, we had quite a lot of questions because, if you feel some of those three things in varying degrees, I imagine that can also make you stressed and or anxious and possibly depressed. And we had people going, how do you tell the difference between those conditions, if you like?
Yeah, it gets really tricky because burnout can lead to depression. If it goes unchecked for too long, you will go over the edge and become depressed. If you're feeling exhausted, cynical, and not effective at your job, it's going to lead to depression if it's left unchecked. But burnout is different from depression or anxiety, in that it's really how we think about it right now is that it's really tied to work. So if you're in other places in your life and you're still able to find joy or feel effective, more so than at work, then that can be a big difference. You still may feel a little bit more cranky with your family or all those things, but it's really in the workplace that's perpetuating it and feeling it the most. So the World Health Organization recognizes burnout. They recognized it even before COVID in their ICD-11 as an occupational phenomenon. So it's really considered an occupational phenomenon tied to chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. So it's really tied to prolonged stress that hasn't been managed. That's how it's officially defined in the World Health Organization's interclassification of diseases.
And Jacinta, obviously, burnout has been talked about a lot at the moment, what with COVID. Is burnout a COVID thing, do you think? Or is burnout, much bigger than just COVID?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Claire, because I think people, think, oh, once COVID's over, we'll feel better, we'll pop back. But I gotta say, burnout has been a growing phenomenon way before COVID. It has been increasing substantially. That's why the World Health Organization even went as far as to recognize it. I know that the three of us have talked. I burned out before COVID even happened, but because it's tied to, prolonged stress that hasn't been successfully managed. And when you think about our changing world and our changing world of work, we have hyperconnectivity, we have artificial intelligence, we have information overload, all these really exciting advances in technology, which is changing our world and our nature of our work. But whatever shines bright, it's very exciting, can also cast a shadow. And that shadow is that it's changing at unprecedented paces. And us humans aren't adapting alongside with it as fast. And it's creating this, a tremendous amount of uncertainty. And as humans, we are wired to hate uncertainty. Like, it's not good for us, like from an evolutionary standpoint. So if we were like hunter gatherers, going into new terrain, and we didn't know what food was safe to eat, we didn't know the weather patterns, we didn't know what predators were going to come out and eat us, that's not safe for our survival. So we don't like uncertainty. That's very scary for us, but we're finding ourselves in an uncertain environment, and that creates prolonged levels of stress. So we really have to think about how to manage that stress. There's a really interesting study that came out of the Imperial College of London, where they illustrated how much we don't like uncertainty. They asked participants, like, I'll give you option 1 or 2. And option 1 was, I can give you a shock right now, or I'll give you a shock at some point, or I may not give you a shock at some point later on the day. And most people picked option 1 because they'd rather have a predictive negative consequence than have the unpredictability. And the people who picked option 2, where they may or may not get a shock, literally showed more physiological stress throughout the day. So it's really real that we're faced with so much uncertainty, but we're not, in our workplaces, need ourselves and our workplaces, because it's a system, need to lean into really thinking about how we build resilience and lean into well-being and lean into stress management, because it's not going away.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to come back to, what can companies do and cultures in a moment. But let's get into what I think pretty much everybody who's on this call wants to know, which is, what can you do about it? What can you do if you got a sense that you're experiencing burnout right now?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I tell people is, first and foremost, is to monitor. It's so important, because the sooner we can catch burnout, the sooner we can do something about it. And the more psychological reserves we have in our metaphorical, like emotional piggy bank to do something about it. I think it's not even a nice to have. We need to be monitoring it. I wear my fitness watch and I track my steps, and doctors have people track their steps, or they track their blood pressure, or they track all kinds of things to make sure you're okay. And if things don't look well, what can they do about it? How do we course correct? And if things are going well, what are you doing that's perpetuating that? So either way, so it's really, really important to monitor. And I can share, I've created a burnout buffering monitoring sheet that I recommend doing once a week, just to know how you're doing, and then know which of the areas may be contributing to burnout. And the more you can figure out, and this burnout buffering monitoring sheet has all these things, the more you can be focused on what to do about it. And then the biggest thing, I think, and Claire and Greta, I definitely want to hear what you think too, because there's so much you can do about it. But the other thing is just really managing your nervous system. And I can get into that in a little bit, but just managing, I have this mantra I tell everyone: when you stress, you must rest. And so allowing yourself to find little micro doses of stress and recovery. In microdoses, I mean like 5, 10, 15, 20, maybe 30, if you can get it in, on a consistent basis throughout the day. That makes all the difference. I love vacations. I think vacation and holiday is great, but it's not enough, and it's not enough consistently throughout the day. Yeah.
With that monitoring sheet, I don't know if there's a place people can go, and if so, maybe we can put it in chat a bit later, but can you just give us an idea of the sort of things that you're tracking?
Yeah. So what you track is how you're doing on a social level. Are you so indicators of burnout? So are you pulling away from social connections? How are you doing emotionally? So that, remember that cynicism and inefficacy, those questions are on there. And then it talks about also just how you're feeling about work in general. And you can start tracking and kind of see, are my scores going down? Are they staying steady? Are they going up? And that can give so much information. And then the next step is figuring out, well, why is this happening? What do I think is going on? Because research has found there's 6 mismatches between a person and their job. That scale analogy I used, that lead to burnout. And so I can go over those in a second too, so you all know about them, because it's not just tied to overworking. And so if you're like, oh, well, I'm noticing I'm more stressed, it must be because I'm overworking, I need to work less. That may not necessarily be the answer, because it could be another thing that's contributing to burnout that most people don't know about. And I see Claire and Greta brought up the
we'll get rid of us so that you can.
Oh,
yeah, we're gone.
Oh, you'll be back though. Okay. So the first one is the obvious one, workload, right? To job demands exceed human limits. That's the obvious one. Too much to do and too little time with too few resources. But the other ones that aren't as obvious and that we've all experienced with COVID, is a breakdown in community. That alone can lead to burnout. We are human beings and we are highly resilient, but we've survived for centuries in communities and tribes. And we spend so much of our waking lives at work. And if we don't feel like we have a place or even a close friend at work, or it's a caustic work environment, or we don't have belonging or inclusion, that alone can lead to burnout. It can take a toll because it's denying a human part of us, which is that we need others. Another one is control. If we don't feel like, if due to micromanagement or constantly changing practices, if we don't feel like we have control over our job conditions, that leads to what we call in psychology learned helplessness. It's like, why even try at my job if I have no control over the outcome? Another one that alone, isolated, all of these in isolation can lead to burnout, is a values conflict. If you're put on a work stream or you're doing something that doesn't feel aligned with what you stand for as a human, that will take a toll over time. And then the other one is reward. As a student in school, like early on, like a child, we'd get these little stars and it would feel really good. And I would be like, oh yes, I got a star for my good work. That desire to be acknowledged and rewarded does not go away as adults. That's a human need, to be able to feel like I'm appreciated and I'm acknowledged for my work. And it's not just economic reward. If anything, it's social and intrinsic reward. And it doesn't have to come from your boss necessarily, but even your coworkers, but being acknowledged for what you do. And if you're not feeling rewarded and you're working really hard, that's going to take a toll. And then the last one, and I think this really lands for women, is like the absence of fairness. If there's a motherhood penalty where that bias that people think, oh, well, because someone has children, they're less invested in their job, which is absolutely not true. And if we have unfair procedures, or there's not clear kind of implicit, explicit job role expectations for success, that can lead to burnout too. So there's a lot more. And so the burnout buffering sheet has those 6 listed. So you can start going, oh, is it this? Oh, is it that? And then you have, the more granular you can get with the cause, the more you can do something about it effectively, because it may not just be from overworking. It may be from this other thing. And that's going to be really important to figure out what the cause is.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That values disconnect is just one example. And thank you to Nicola, who's shared in chat for everybody a link to find the buffering monitoring sheet. Okay. You talked about something which a lot of people have asked about, which is, you talked about micro moments to just take a breath. What do you do when you've got work obligations, you're feeling like you're burnt out, you're feeling exhausted, but right now for the next 2-3 months, there's a massive client project deadline and you would be totally letting the team, the company, the client down? How do you get through that, just briefly, that kind of scenario?
Thank you for that question.
Because it's holiday.
Yeah, exactly. And I love this question because it's so real. And that's the thing I hear from people. They're like, yeah, that all sounds great to rest, but I have so much on my plate. Right. And so I'll bring up, something I'll start with, and then I'll answer the question, is that, the reality is, and this is going to sound a little crazy, but I'll explain it. Stress actually isn't bad for you. We are wired, evolutionarily speaking, to tolerate stress. So if I was walking around in nature and a bear comes at me and jumps out and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a bear, what my nervous system, my sympathetic nervous system will kick in, and I'll do one of 3 things. I can fight the bear. That is not going to go well. I'm 5'1". It's going to be not a pretty match. I can flight, I can run away from the bear and try to escape it, or I freeze out of fear. Now, let's say I flight and run away and I escape the bear. I know I'm safe. My nervous system calms down. My parasympathetic nervous system, which is tied to stress, rest, and digest, kicks in. and my stress levels go down. But in today's world, we have these metaphorical bears kind of coming at us all the time, which is leaving us chronically stressed and our nervous system chronically activated, which leads to so much health complications. It affects performance over time. It taxes our psychological resources. So the idea here, and if you could, Claire and Greta, bring up that stress performance curve for me.
Yeah, the only problem is that apparently the slides are a bit blurry. So
okay.
I will bring it up. Just give me 2 seconds. The stress curve. Here we are.
And this is a curve that's tied to peak performance research on athletes and high performing people. And so at the bottom, you see the arousal level. So that means how much stressed you are physiologically. And on the side, you see performance from weak to strong performance. And what research has found is that too little stress, and you've probably all felt this, like where you're kind of like, I can't get into my work, like I'm not stressed enough, actually doesn't lead to high engagement or performance or fulfillment for people. We actually have to have a little tiny bit of stress to perform optimally and feel engaged and excited about our work. But too much stress over a long period of time impairs our performance. So it's okay to stress, but it has to be in small doses. It cannot be chronic, and we have to rest. So the idea here is that if you have a stressful, let's say, meeting or a stressful sprint at your work, counterbalancing that with just 5, 10, 15 minutes of rest to let your nervous system recover, and then go back to another meeting, but then add in a small little moment to recover again, and then go back into something. So every time I do a talk like this, I know my nervous system is activated. I'm excited to be here. I love what I do. You look at my hands are waving everywhere, right? And so but I know your nervous system doesn't know if I'm excited or stressed. It just is activated. So what I do is I always put a 5 or 10 minute hold in my calendar and just stop and breathe. That's my kind of hack, but there's a lot of ways. You can think about your kids, or you can FaceTime really quick with your child, or hug a pet, or so many other things to allow your nervous system to recover. And then if I have another stressful meeting, I'll go back to that stressful meeting, but then I put in little moments of rest over time in my calendar. And so on Fridays, what I do is I try to look at my calendar and I'm like, oh, I have this big stressful thing, or I'm meeting with this person who's like an energy vampire for me. I need to counterbalance that with someone who fulfills me. And it's all just about a balancing act, so that if you start to go over that curve, you pull yourself back. You start to go over, you pull yourself back. And that can make the difference. It's the little tiny things over time done on a consistent and persistent basis that can make all the difference. And so it doesn't require a huge vacation or an overhaul and behavior change or start. I mean, I love it. I'm like, yeah, let's everyone start a yoga practice and a meditation practice, all these cool things. But I know we're busy, and I don't want to be like, add more and more to your plate. If you can do anything, it's that little tiny moments and micro doses of rest that can allow your nervous system to recover. And the more you practice it, the faster you get at recovering your nervous system. It's quite amazing, actually.
Yeah, I love that. I love the fact that it's all those little mini habits that make the difference. And I know, from personal experience, having been burnt out myself, that it is, it's actually making sure, for example, that I go and I'm lucky enough to live near the beach, see the ocean, or have my walk to my coffee shop, because the walk is the thing that really helps me meeting somebody at the coffee shop, etc. So I think those things are really important. We forget about those things. One of the other,
can I jump in real quick? I love those examples, because I do want to say it's a lot of different things that can do that for you. Like nature can lower your cortisol levels, because we're wired to find sanctuary in nature. From an evolutionary standpoint, we spent 99.9% of our time in nature. So nature naturally, even just looking at nature images, listening to nature sounds can really relax us. And I encourage people to crowdsource. I'm always like asking people, like, what do you do? And asking each other. And if you have a team, coming up with a menu of options to get really creative, so it doesn't get boring over time.
Maybe we could ask people on chat to say what's the thing that really energizes them, just to give everybody ideas.
And Jacinta, if people are listening now feeling totally burnt out? Are these micro little steps enough to drag you out, or do you have to sort of be a bit more radical at that point and say, I've got to just take a week off, even if I have to wait 8 weeks, I've got light at the end of the tunnel, I'm going to sort of kind of restore some of that energy if I'm feeling it a bit sort of rock bottom?
Yeah, if you're rock bottom, it is different. I think these micro things will help, but there is an important piece to step away and actually allow yourself to have a full reset, like the reboot, basically, and really take inventory of what is causing the burnout. How are you going to, if you can, recraft kind of how you're operating at work, what boundaries you'd want to set. And so it's kind of taking an inventory and stepping back and making a plan. So when you do re-enter, you do feel more equipped, because otherwise it's so much expectation of someone. But these micro things are just powerful. And I'm loving what's coming in the chat. It's really exciting.
Go guys, gals, I should say.
It's amazing. We should share all these at the end. Great inspiration for everyone.
Yeah.
And so those are they're great things to do. And then also there's this reset and kind of stepping out and then trying to build better practices when you do come back in. Let's talk about some of those practices when you come back in, which is around setting boundaries for yourself, because a lot of the questions we heard about were around how do I actually set boundaries and not feel guilty about that, particularly in light of the fact that I would imagine a lot of people on this webinar are high achievers who want to get promoted. That's really important to them, so they want to be doing a great job and they're going all out, and then then we're telling them they need boundaries and they have to say no to stuff. How do you do that practically? What are your tips?
Yes. Oh, boundaries is such a tricky one for people. It feels so uncomfortable, especially if you tend to be a people pleaser, and especially as women, we're socialized a lot to, make others happy and please. And it's so critical for allowing ourselves to actually help more and actually contribute more and do better work. What research has found is that people who give without boundaries, so boundaryless helping, they actually end up with what I call a helper's hangover, where you give and you actually are resentful towards the end. You're just like, oh. And so there's this really great quote that I love. It's like, choose a moment of discomfort over regret. Whereas people who do boundary and it's values aligned helping, and I'll talk about how to set those in a second, actually end up with a helper's high, and they actually can help more and they feel more fulfilled. So it's about really being thoughtful about what you do, say yes, and what you say no to. So what I encourage people to do is the first step is to go through and figure out what your 5 core values are. And there's some really great value lists online you can find, and thinking about when you feel most proud or people you look up to, what do they emanate that you really admire, or what have you done in your life that you're really excited about, and what value does that represent? Then adding in, tied to that value, what you will do and what you won't do. So let's say I value family. So I won't check emails on the weekend. I will check an email that is urgent or from this person or this person, but the rest of the emails I won't check. And so having what you will and will not do is very important, because if we just do what we don't do, then we don't have enough wiggle room either. So it's really powerful. And then educating, when you have to say no, you can educate, you can say no. No is a complete sentence as well. But you can also educate people, because if you have been someone who, and I'm totally have struggled with this. This is one of my biggest areas. People are almost shocked when I'm like, no, all of a sudden. But I've gotten better and better. And I actually have a script that I have. I'm like, I would love to take advantage of this opportunity, but I cannot at this time. So, or I say, in the efforts of promoting and practicing my resilience practices, I have to say no. So having that set that set sentences, and I have them on my computer on a sticky note, so I can just be like, okay, there they are, helps me so much, because it's not natural for me. It's a new skill for me. And so I need that little boost of like a pre-written script to help me. But if their values aligned and they tie to meaning and purpose, we feel so much better. But if it's not, and it's in the gray area, it's not worth it. So even saying no to things you want to do in order to say yes to the things that truly matter is something I can't emphasize more.
Absolutely. And just a blatant plug for our podcast. We've actually got a whole episode on how to say no. So
it's hard.
Yeah,
I love
it. Really is. It really is.
And you're so right about that moment of discomfort, because it's uncomfortable, it's stressful to say no, and it absolutely raises the fear of you being penalized. And let's face it, and be frank, in some cultures that we don't want to emulate ideally, and we don't want to have multiple scenarios of, it can penalize you. And so you have to be thoughtful about, that the trade-offs, I guess, as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Can I jump in and say one thing about all these amazing ideas for replenishment here? I just want to say I'm so amazed by this group, because I didn't mention that true leisure is things that fill your soul and lead to mindfulness, and not compensatory leisure, which is like where you sit on the couch and scroll through social media. Like I'm seeing origami, I'm saying listen to your favorite music. I saw watch comedy that makes you laugh. Like these are things that fill your soul. So you all got it without me actually. I missed a important piece of that, which was doing things that don't just compensatory leisure is very easy. It's so tempting. I'm like, oh, I just want to lay on the couch and just look online, but that's not true leisure. True leisure is things that you walk away feeling more fulfilled. So I'm just loving this list. Wow, what a great group. They got it.
Caroline, I love open water swimming too.
That's so good. Another lot of questions came in about not just when you yourself are feeling burnt out or worried about getting down that pathway, but when you observe others that are either close to you in family or colleagues or direct reports, how can you help someone who you think is kind of on that path, and how do you do that without getting them defensive or sort of not reacting well?
Yeah, it's so important to check in. I think it's so important to normalize, like we're humans and we are not machines. And again, when we avoid being human for too long, it's going to take a toll, and it feels really good to be checked in with. And so you can ask permission, and that's a big thing. It's just saying, hey, I want to check in about how you're doing. I noticed some things. Is that okay? So you're asking permission, which makes the person who is feeling vulnerable say yes or no. They get to set the boundary, which can make all the difference. And you don't have to say, you can also set, because the social support, right, community, breakdown in community can lead to burnout. You can also set up a group. I do this. I have a group of women and we're on WhatsApp and we check in every week and we say, how are you doing? Are you in the red? Are you in the yellow? Are you in the green? And then we say why, and we support each other. And that alone can make such a huge difference. And then and then asking, how can I best support you? Do you want me just to listen? Because we don't want to give advice. If the person's not ready for advice, it's the worst. It shuts down. We've all had that where someone's like telling us what to do. And we're like, I just wanted empathy right now. I don't really. So asking, how can I help you? Do you want me to give some tips? Do you want me to just listen? Do you want me to talk through things with you? And so it's about asking these things so that they can feel like they have the control, because when we are burning out, we don't feel in control.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I bet you two have some good tips too for this.
Yeah, I mean, I love that check-in, and particularly if you are having regular one-on-ones. I think that is a really important time to do that. But you can also do it as a team kind of ritual. Yeah. You're having a team meeting, and you can have some symbols that if you're doing it virtually or even in person. Happy faces or whatever, just to make it normal for people to be talking about this stuff, because that's often the biggest issue is people, feel like they have to hide it.
I like that, because also if you have a team and you do it through good times and bad, then you, as you say, Jacinta, you've really normalized just kind of talking about how are we all going, how are we all tracking at some point as a regular. Then it's less intimidating to potentially sort of own up. And I think the other thing when you're leading a team is to lead by example, and to be able to be vulnerable with your, say if you're having a one-on-one with a direct report, to say, look, like virtual working, juggling, homeschooling and trying to do the day job. I am really struggling right now. This is not going to be a great week for me. Even just being vulnerable and showing, as Jacinta said, you're human. I think allowing that psychological safety for being human is a really good practice as well.
Absolutely.
What about, people who are kind of in denial? They're on your team maybe, and then they don't want to talk about it. And yet you can see that cynicism perhaps dialing up. Are there any other sort of things that you could suggest?
Yeah, I love this question, because it really is, if someone is very cynical or very much in the throes of burnout, it can affect the team and team morale. There's a thing called emotional contagion, where if someone has a very strong emotion, the group can actually catch the emotion, positive or negative. So it works positive too. And it's very powerful. So we want to address it. And also the person's suffering, they're hurting, and maybe it's scary to address it and see it. And so one thing that can really be powerful is just social modeling or social proof, where someone, especially if you're a leader, start to talk about your own burnout experiences, or start to share that you're working towards this. And that can just model that this is something that needs to be thought about, or even just having a go around the room and everyone talking about their levels of stress and recovery can make such a big difference as well. It really has to come from an intrinsic place from that person, unless it starts affecting performance and things as well. Then that's a different conversation. But it really, the more you can listen. So there's this other thing we call in psychology change talk. So if you notice a little tiny moment where they're like, I'm feeling stressed, it's like jumping on that, looking for those moments of change talk versus what we call maintain talk, where they're kind of arguing like, I'm fine. But if you hear moments of where I call them little like golden nuggets in the speech, they're talking about all kinds of stuff and they're like, but I'm stressed and I don't know if I can do all this. It's like, and then they mention about their cat or something else. You go back to like, I'm stressed. You're stressed, you said. Tell me more about that. So really trying to look for those opportunities where they get to hear themselves, because it's one thing to hear someone else tell you they're worried, but if you can hear someone repeat back to you what you're saying about your worry, that's so much more powerful for that person.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that whole piece around the emotional contagion is really important. And we had a couple of questions around, if I'm the leader and I'm suffering burnout, what do I do? How do I stop that from infiltrating and spreading to my team? And also, how do I look after myself in that moment as well?
Yeah, I think the best thing you can do as a leader is work to establish psychological safety first and foremost. Like setting up, and psychological safety is coined by Amy Edmondson. She's a Harvard Business School professor. And it's this idea that there's a shared understanding that people can take interpersonal risks in a group and not be shamed for it. I liken this to like a psychological trust fall. I don't know if you've seen, I've never been in a trust fall, but I've seen it on TV where the person falls back and they're on a platform and the team's there to catch them and safely guide them to the ground. Well, it's this kind of same thing with psychological safety. You're taking a psychological leap of faith with an intention or an idea or a vulnerable statement, knowing that the team is going to safely guide you to the ground and you have a safe landing place. And so to develop those, and I have another handout I can share with Mentor Walks after, I don't know if I shared it, about how to develop psychological safety team norms. And so it's about setting norms about how do we want to talk about stress? If I'm stressed, what do you all want me to do? Do you want me to talk about it? Is that going to stress you out? How do we share information? How do we normalize it? Do we want to talk about it in our one-on-ones? Do we want to talk about it? And the whole group comes out with norms around how to share. And that can create, again, so much certainty in a world of work where we don't have certainty. That's so important. And you can do this with your peers even too. It doesn't have to just be with your team. And so it can make such a big difference of setting that foundation. Then as a leader, you've heard from your team what they want from you. And you can share that you're burning out, but also be sharing how you're dealing with it. What are you doing proactively to deal with it, to be a model of resilience as well?
Yeah. And I guess, you know, if you're really burnt out and your team can see you're really burnt out, then actually stopping, as hard as that may be, you know, actually having a reset would be a very important thing to model to others. And I know how hard it is because I've done it. Yeah. But we've got a couple of, we're sort of at 12:43. Do you think we should, we've got a couple of questions.
I'd like to ask one quick question, and then we should go to some live chat ones. Are you seeing any differences between countries? You know, like if we feel like, you know, this really seems to have hit a hot button here in Australia with this session and people's questions, and such great questions. And sorry if we haven't got to exactly your question, but, you know, are you seeing differences, or is this like a bit of a global phenomena, hence the World Health Organization thing?
Yeah, it is absolutely a global phenomenon. But I think certain countries, like you both can speak to it more, such as Australia, have been really hit so much harder.
Yeah,
and there's that
land.
Yes.
Particularly in Melbourne, really.
Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. And that takes, again, it's our psychological stress resources being taxed slowly but surely over time. And it's these corrosive drips of stress in mass that really take a toll on us and create that chronic stress that has not been successfully managed that leads to burnout.
And jumping in there, if I can.
Yeah, please do.
There's a chat question on this. You know, can you have like double burnout? Because especially for people in Melbourne, but even in Sydney, we've had 107 days recently of lockdown with homeschooling plus potentially full-time work. Can you have double burnout? Can you actually manage to burn out in both of those sort of jobs, if you like?
Yeah, it's because it's jobs. Like parenting is a job. Work is a job. So it depends on, if you're feeling like again, that gap between our capacities as humans and the nature of our work is pulling too hard, because we are humans and we have to lean into these core capacities that have allowed us to thrive and survive for centuries. And those are things like how we replenish, right? How do we restore? How do we connect with others? How do we stay true to our values and our purpose? How do we manage our energy? All of these things that make us so human, because again, I'm going to say it again, and I sound like a broken record, but we are human beings. We are not machines. And when we try to avoid being human for too long, it becomes dangerous. So yes. Yeah.
Another question here coming in sort of live is, you know, I've not been able to meet with my manager, you know, one-on-one, and that really has compounded that sense of isolation, I feel. And how do I, whether it's isolation or I might be feeling symptoms of burnout, how do I actually raise that with my manager in a way that I'm not going to feel shamed, and how do I do that constructively?
Oh man, that is so tough. Whoever wrote that, I'm so sorry that you're feeling disconnected from your manager, because the manager really does shape our work. And so if a manager can create psychological safety, and then we're working on leaning into our human side, we're keeping the scales in balance. It's a two-way street. But if we're not having our manager yet engaged, I think the best way is to really think about it's not a one size fits all approach, because every manager and every culture has a very different makeup. And so I really emphasize the 3 T's of communication. So timing, knowing when's the right time to do this. Is it the end of the quarter when they're really stressed? Maybe not. When is the best time? Then technique. How do they communicate with me, and how can I message it to get really tied to how they think and communicate? And then tone. So how do you really have that tone that feels like authoritative and matter of fact, but also talks about their human side? And so bringing those three elements in can really give you a leg up and thinking about how to strategically manage that. And I wish it wasn't the case. And hopefully, 1 out of every 2 employees want to see a greater focus on well-being. So if it's managers need to start, it's a new skill for them too, though. So they're going to learn too, and they may not get it perfect. And it doesn't have to be a discouragement that they'll learn, but it's going to be a little bit awkward at first, because like anything new, just as children, we learn to walk, we fall, we stumble, but we'll get it. And so it's about really trying to figure out how you can get this. Don't give up if your manager doesn't respond the right way, right away.
Yeah. And I'd add, especially if it's a new manager for you, that if there's someone you trust who's a peer who maybe knows that manager better, then sort of just kind of sounding them out in a way that feels appropriate and safe. But if you trust them, hopefully it will, to sort of get their advice on, how do you think this would land? Or do you have any advice for me how I should just raise it? Like, I'm just really on empty right now and just need some kind of acknowledgement of that, or whatever the scenario might be, that also could help with that. We've got another question here. I'll say it literally, and then we can sort of, can you recover if your peers drop you in that so-called trust exercise, or is this a sign to move on?
Oh, such a good question. Because that is such a terrible feeling to be dropped in the trust exercise. So exclusion hurts. Literally, it lights up the same centers in the brain as real physical pain. So people who, you hear it in music, she broke my heart, like literally it hurts. You get rejected, like it's painful. And so I think it's a matter of, can you try to address it and bring up the power of psychological safety? But if it happens again and again, that is not going to be a place where people thrive. Psychological safety, the research has found, is one of the, if not the biggest predictor of team performance. Because when we feel safe, fear goes down, uncertainty goes down, and courage increases. People are able to admit mistakes and know they won't be punished for it. So the team catches mistakes or corrects mistakes, moves faster. Everyone benefits. It is I think it's one of the most important things that a manager or leader can establish in our new world of work, to create conversation around well-being. So, but if it leading to a breakdown in community, right? That was one of the markers of burnout, and lack of psychological safety or belonging will do that. That is a red flag and something to really monitor closely.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. We've got a few questions on sort of when you take leave and how annual leave. So do you recommend longer breaks, e.g. a week or more of annual leave, or to pepper annual leave days throughout the year so that we can have days of quiet and rest, even though it's for a shorter time?
Yeah. Oh, such a good question. I love this. So I am a big proponent of and I have this in my book, where I have different types of leisure. So you have the micro, and you make like a menu of micro leisures. Those are 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. Then you have moderate leisure, and then you have mega leisure, and these are bigger breaks.
I love those breaks. Brilliant.
So you can have different ones and figure out how you want to sparse them throughout. So if you're doing a lot of little ones, maybe once or twice a year, you do just a day or 2 days, a staycation, and then you have your big one later on. So you can have kind of a mix of them, but really delineating all these different types of leisure and having them clear and going, which one do you want to hit throughout the year, can be powerful. And I have clients who, every time it's their birthday, they go away and they go on a camping trip, and they kind of center and reestablish. And that is a cue, it's like a ritual for them. So it's not just after something, it's something they look forward to. And it's very, very powerful to have kind of a menu of different lengths of leisure, so that you can really be proactive in thinking about this. So I love that question, because it's showing proactiveness and thinking about you have to plan it all out.
Absolutely. I can't agree with you more. I am just such a huge proponent for holidays.
Mega.
I'm a mega girl here, and
micro when you can go mega.
And I have to have every quarter, I have to have what I would call, a mega, at least a week or more. Because that's really very, very, very important to my
values, I'd say.
My values, but also my burnout, because I burn out, and I know that I have to have that in place. It's core part of my structure. Now, I guess it depends on your, whether you've got kids, whether, at the moment, lots of people have not been able to go on holiday. And I have to say, it's been a big challenge for me personally as well, in the sense that getting away from the home is really important to feel like I've had a break. And so had to do that in a slightly different way during lockdown, sort of days in my 5 kilometer thing where I do something different and feel like it's a bit of a holiday. But I think that rest periods and the way that you talk about them is really, really important. Now we've got 7 minutes.
You can keep going. There's a bit of time.
Yeah. Let's talk about the role of leadership and organizations to create a place where people thrive. What strategies have you seen to really drive that in the essence and the culture?
Oh, I think it's so, so important to have organizations understand that burnout comes not just from overworking, that it comes from 6 different mismatches. And so how to design an employee experience from end to end that really buffers against the 6 mismatches. And so at the organizational level, I have these kind of ABCs of a healthy organization. So the first one is agency. That's allowing people to have control as much as possible and autonomy. We do so much better when we have some kind of say, to the extent possible, in our work. The next one is benevolence. It's do no harm, like equitable decision-making, fairness practices, implicit and explicit job role expectations. And then the last one, the C, is community. And that's what we talked about, like psychological safety, belonging, inclusion. And so if we can do the ABCs, those actually protect, these 3 pillars protect against those 6 mismatches. And then at the leadership level, I like 3s, I guess. I have, I don't know if you have that slide. Claire and Greta.
Yeah, I got the slide, yeah. Which
people remember things in 3s. I don't know. I bring it up. I always have everything in 3s. So forgive me. It's the resilient team leadership slide.
Okay, I think this is it.
Yes, yeah. There it is. So as a leader, these are the 3 core components that I tell leaders at a team level. So establishing norms that promote psychological safety, and that handout will help you do that. And I've heard such great things from leaders all over the world who've done this. And they're like, our team really appreciated it because it's written norms. It's really powerful. The second one is detect. So monitoring signs and causes of burnout within your team, because that gives you a clue. If everyone's having a community breakdown burnout complaint, then that's something you need to do as a leader to fix it. If it's a values one, what is you can do? So it gives you a clue of where you need to tweak your kind of leadership approach as well. And then the final one is demonstrate. Leaders need to model, reward, and reinforce pro-resilience mindset, skills, and behaviors. If we're not walking the talk, then that's going to really affect the team's ability to be like, well, if they're not doing it and they're working all the time, I'm not going to feel safe to take a little micro dose of rest. Like, that's scary, right? So these 3 things, when they come together, that really helps bolster a resilient team. And it doesn't take much. It can be on a one-on-one to just say, hey, how you doing? Bring your monitoring sheet with me. Or in a team meeting, let's go around the room. Everyone say how they're doing. Let's see how everyone's feeling. Or people can do it anonymously even as a leader, and getting that input, because data is power. And when you have that data, you can do something about it and course correct before it's too late.
Fantastic. I'm just looking at time and knowing that we have 4 minutes left, and I think we need to hand over. Is that right, Nina?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, because I can see there are more questions and I want to know so much more as well, but I think we need to
we can go on and on and on. But I really want to thank you, Jacinta. We always, we have lots of conversations, but we always love them, and we always learn from these conversations. And I can't recommend your book enough to everyone. You can find it. It's available in Australia on all the normal platforms. It really gives you like very, very practical tips that we've been using actually both with ourselves and with our clients. It's really really, really great. So thank you so much.
And you can also hear on the podcast as well, we interviewed Jacinta just a little while back, so you can hear more about her own story, which is, her backstory is pretty cool.
Yeah, it really is.
Thank you so much. I'm loving, I'm like, oh my gosh, the time went by so fast. Like all the questions are so great in this group. I'm so impressed by, I've spoken a lot about burnout, obviously, and the leisure examples were spot on. Like those were excellent in terms of finding these ways to replenish. And so hopefully you left with, feeling like it's practical, like you don't have to do some crazy big thing to start buffering against burnout. The little things done on a consistent basis, little by little, a little can become a lot.
Yeah. As well as mega holidays.
And mega holidays.
Wrote that one down. Thank you so much, Jacinta, and thank you so much, Claire and Greta. It's really been an amazing experience. This is new for us to do something at lunchtime, and I think it lands really well because people are still fresh. They're still, they're taking the time out of their lunch break. So thank you all for being with us and for taking a bit of time out of your day to be here. I learned an absolute fortune. I think it's amazing to be able to really identify what burnout is. I think it's really incredible that you've given us the tips and tricks, and that we've all shared with each other some ideas of what we can do. And we'll send out a follow-up email afterwards and share the tips that came through on the chat. And also, as a leader, I think it's so important to be able to identify what you can do for your team and try and create the environment and set them up for success and create that psychological safety for them, so that if not completely avoiding burnout, at least they've got a safe place that they can come. So thank you again. Really, it's been an incredible experience for all of us here today. This video will be loaded up to our YouTube channel. So if anybody wants to watch it again, or if anyone knows anyone that couldn't make it, please feel free to share it. We'll send out the link. Just a couple of Mentor Walks housekeeping things. This week is our 5th birthday, which is so exciting for us. 5 years of bringing Mentor Walks to women in Australia. That's been 200 events, 25 million steps across 8 locations. It's 5,000 mentees, 350 mentors, of which Greta and Claire are an incredible part of our community as mentors. So thank you so much. We have a Sydney walk this Friday, which is virtual. There are a few tickets left, so have a look on our website if you are free. It's 7:30 to 8:30 on Friday morning. And if you're in Melbourne, we have a real in-person, real-life walk next Friday, and also a few tickets left for that. Thank you again for joining us over your lunch hour. Hope the rest of your day goes smoothly, and thank you both to the 3 of you again. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Be well.
That was amazing. Well done.
Well done with